You're going to see me, you probably hear me smiling right now because my next guest is somebody that I still look forward to meeting in person. Okay? He's literally, he's one of the voices that you must listen to, irrespective of what side you're on. And I mean that with the absolute sincerity. Whether you're on, the Palestinian side, whether you're on the Israeli side, if you do not take time out to go and Google and read up on Professor Ilan Pappe, as you say in Nigeria, you're on your own. Professor Pappe, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having you in your show. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening.
The pleasure is mine. I became a nuisance on your WhatsApp, didn't I? Calling.
No, it was very welcome. It was very welcome.
Thank you. Gosh, I wish we could have you for 2 hours. Really, there's so much. There's so much I want to get out of you. But let's start from where we are now and perhaps then work backwards. Where were you when you heard of Hamas's attack on Israel on October the 7th?
Yeah, I was in Haifa. I teach in the UK and I share my life half of the time in the UK and half of the time in the city of Haifa in the north of Israel. And when the attack happened, it was the time that I'm in Haifa. I was in Haifa, so I heard the news a bit later that morning. And like everyone else, of course, it took a long time to digest and understand what went on. And of course, the information in the first day or two was also incomplete. So I waited a bit before even trying to say something, just to take in, to understand what went on. It was a big surprise, no doubt, for everyone concerned. Yes.
And we have to talk about that surprise because it brings me on to my next question. How was Hamas able to penetrate? You're also a political scientist, Lagos. Let me tell you, he's also a political scientist. How was Hamas able to penetrate the superior, sophisticated security apparatus that is Israel? How?
That's a very, very good question. There are now running two kinds of narratives, two kinds of explanation. The one that is still more likely, I think, is that the Israelis were very confident in their ability, quite misinformed about the capacity of the Hamas, of its determination, of the desperate situation in which the people of Gaza were, and were willing to take risks that probably very few people would have taken. So that's one narrative. And yet I must say that the more conspiracy, orientated, which says it was too easy. And why did the Israeli army waited 5 hours after the kibbutzim there, the settlements were taken? Why it waited 5 hours before it went in? I must say there are a lot of questions about it. Is it in between these two theories, namely that there was an intentional kind of wish by the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is in deep trouble? We may talk about it a bit later. In deep trouble, and he hoped maybe, even if there were the signs, that it would not be such a successful Hamas operation, and therefore, but enough to distract everyone in Israel from the internal kind of civil war that was going on there, a cold one, not a real civil war, but definitely a kind of a civil war from his own trouble of corruption and so on. And it went out of hand. He didn't expect this to be like this, but was not too worried by the signs, or even did not make the effort of moving enough troops that he preferred to put in the West Bank to defend. I don't know. I mean, it's too near, to the event itself. It was such a sophisticated fence with, all kind of electronic devices that even a bird touched that fence. Everybody knew about it. And you probably have seen, as
Yeah.
I have, the clips. They went with an old tractor and just brought down that fence in more than one place. So really, I'm waiting with, to be honest, and I hope that I'm not disappointing with my answer. I'm really waiting for more evidence to unfold, because there's too much that is there which is still suspicious and not easily explained rationally, you know. Apart from the fact that definitely it was a daring operation by people who were caged for 15 years in a mega big prison, and they went out with all the outrage and so on, and did what they did. Did they expect to be so successful? I also wonder. But that's, I think we'll have to wait with the judgment on that for a little bit more.
Okay. Prime Minister Netanyahu declared war immediately, almost immediately. And he says, and I quote, they're at war with Hamas. My guest before you, who's the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman, he also said, we are at war with Hamas. But since then, the declaration of that war, we've seen over 11,000 Palestinians killed, over 4,000 children, doctors, journalists, health workers, UN workers. Is there a war against Hamas or a war against the people?
No, I think it's a war on Gaza. In 2010, I published a book with Noam Chomsky called The War on Gaza. And we referred to a military operation in 2009, which we thought was horrific because it ended with so many civilian casualties in Gaza and mass destruction. Little did we know of how far the Israeli power of destruction can go. So no, I think there is part of what the Israelis are doing is retaliation against the Hamas. There's no doubt about it. But very quickly, it turned into a total war against the people of Gaza. And it's not only what we know is happening on the ground, it is the conversation that we hear that accompanies these operations from, senior ministers in the government through senior media people. We hear the same language. We will wipe out Gaza. We will wipe out the Strip. We will get rid of it. So even the language does not only talk about the Hamas, and there's a total equation between the Hamas in the eyes of Israelis and whoever lives in Gaza. If you would have listened, as I have, to the kind of conversations one can hear on the Israeli radio and television, you can see a lot of ex-generals and experts and pundits say, well, the doctors of the Gaza Strip are complicit in what happened. The street vendors are complicit in what happened. And people even go as saying, the children would anyway grow into being terrorists. The atmosphere is, in one word, genociding the people of Gaza is still regarded within a reasonable, proportional reaction to the horrific things that did happen, of course, and I condemn them, on the 7th of October in the Israeli kibbutzim, that is the settlement, the development towns, and so on, for the first half day of the 7th of October on a Saturday.
The people of Gaza, you've called it a cage. Hamas is the democratically elected government in Gaza. However, the EU, the US, the UK, and a couple of others have actually prescribed Hamas as a terrorist organization. Is Hamas a terrorist organization, in your opinion, Professor?
This is such a good question, because in my own university, I'm facing some legal proceedings and so on, because I wrote an article which claimed that the framing of Hamas, either by Britain or anyone else, as a terrorist organization is a very shallow, very reductionist and misunderstanding of what the Hamas is. The reason I am a bit in the trouble there, and that's okay, is that I'm also a law-abiding citizen of Britain. So if the law says Hamas is a terrorist organization, I'm not going to violate the law. However, as I explained, and I hope that they will accept it, I'm one of the world experts on Hamas. And nobody consulted me in the British government before they took that decision. It was a directive from Israel to include Hamas in the list of terrorist organizations. Had they come not only to me, I mean, I'm not the only, there's some of us who really are experts on the topic, who have studied it and researched it for 15, 20 years as professional academics. And we would have told the government, the Hamas is part of the Palestinian liberation movement. And the Palestinian liberation movement always had both a religious and a secular side to it. So the Hamas is the more religious part of that liberation movement. And it is therefore definitely, like so many liberation movements, we know it from the history of Africa, we know it from the history of other places, sometimes liberation movements do use terror, do use violence in their struggle for liberation. But also the colonialist states and also Israel is using terror. So nobody can take the high moral ground on terrorism is here. But using terror or using armed struggle or using diplomatic means are all part of the arsenal that the liberation movement has if it feels that its people are under the danger of being destroyed, that they are being killed on a daily basis in the West Bank, that they are strangulated and starved in the Gaza Strip, that they are discriminated against as citizens of Israel, and if they are refugees are not allowed to return. So if you take this into account, you can see why the Secretary General of the United Nations said you have to take this into within an historical context. And that historical context also refers to the Hamas. What is the Hamas? Why was it created? What does it represent? Defining it as a terrorist organization means that it just uses terror for the sake of terror. No, it is part of the Palestinian attempt to change a reality of colonization, oppression, ghettoization, and I'm very at peace with myself. I never shun from condemning also an anti-colonialist movement when it commits crimes against war crimes. I just want this to be the prism through which we examine everyone. And finally, I would say the Hamas's violence is not the source of violence. It's the symptom of violence. The source of violence goes back in history to a Jewish, which is a tragedy, a movement of Jewish refugees that were kicked out of Europe and decided to colonize someone else's homeland. That's very tragic. And that tragedy created the violence of the settlers, the Jewish settlers, and the counter-violence of the anti-colonialist Palestinian movement. This is the framework. Anything else is really playing into the hands of the Israelis and will perpetuate the violence. Instead of saying there is here a situation of oppression, colonization, let's involve everyone, the Hamas, the Fatah, the Palestinians in Israel, the Palestinian refugees, and the Israelis. And let's sit together and think, is this the only possible way of sharing the land of Palestine or other better, peaceful alternatives?
Let's talk about, I still want us to go back because I'm glad you've gone back to the history. Zionism. Zionism you've referred to as a racist ideology. You've talked about liberal Zionists and right-wing Zionists. You've talked about liberal Zionists like Mapham, who actually, you could call them, I don't know, hypocritical Zionists, perhaps, maybe. Talk to us, because I have lots of people listening who actually do not know the difference between Zionism, Jewish, the religion, Jewish, the people, and the fact that Zionist values are not necessarily Jewish values. Talk to us about that, please, sir.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're asking it. I would just preface it by saying that one of the problems when people say to you, let's say, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, you can never answer these questions with a soundbite. You really need some time to explain exactly the differences that you were talking about. Zionism began as a movement of Jews in Central and Eastern Europe who were looking for a way to run away from anti-Semitism, which really reached its peak during the Holocaust with the genocide of the Jews of Europe. But there were also a movement that wanted to redefine Judaism as a nationalism, not as a religion. All this is very fine. People have the right, first of all, of course, to escape extinction, and they have the right to define themselves as they wish. However, the moment they decided that the best way to feel safe and to turn Judaism from a religion to nationalism would be in Palestine, a place already inhabited by another people, they became what we call in the literature a settler colonial movement. Very similar to the white people who came to North America and created the United States and Canada and encountered the native people of North America, and we know what they did to them. They genocided them. This is the tragedy of this encounter. Now, the moment the settlers received support from the British Empire, they were able to set a foot in Palestine, to build an infrastructure for a state. And when they had the power in 1948, they did what all settler colonial movements did in history. They tried to get rid of the native population, and they only partly succeeded in this. They expelled half of Palestine's population in 1948, but half of the Palestinian population still remained in historical Palestine. And even after 1967, when Israel occupied whichever parts of Palestine it did not occupy in 1948, namely the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, still the presence of millions of Palestinians is a problem for a national movement that believes that the whole country has to be Jewish and only Jewish. So what do you do with millions of people? So sometimes you enclave them, like they did in Gaza and in parts of the West Bank. Sometimes you massively expel them. Sometimes you expel them incrementally on a daily basis. This is where it becomes racism. I'm not saying that from the very beginning Zionism was racism. But you know, when the African member states, and this includes Nigeria, by the way, when the African member states in 1975 debated in the United Nations whether they should submit a resolution that equates Zionism with racism, they already understood, because this was already 1975, they already understood that the colonization of Palestine is only possible because the Zionist movement and the State of Israel dehumanizes the Palestinians. They not see them as equal people, human beings. And that's why, despite the good relationship that some of the African states had with Israel on development and agriculture and so on, nonetheless, they understood that at the time when they were condemning South Africa for its apartheid system, they saw the same thing happening, and even in many ways worse, happening inside Israel. So that's one point. The second point I want to say is that there's always a difference between religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, which is a matter of faith, which has its own, sacred books and whatever goes with either a monotheistic religion or even a religion like Hinduism. And there's a difference between that and ideology. Zionism is ideology, it's not a religion. The Jewish faith is religion. And this is why, if I look back, let's say Zionism already exists, I would say 140 years. If I look back at the 140 years of existence of the Zionist movement, I can tell you confidently as a researcher, there are many Jews who are not Zionists, and there are many non-Jews who are Zionists. So that tells you it's a matter whether do you subscribe to the ideology of Zionism, and it doesn't matter, by the way, if you are Jewish or not. What matters is, do you accept the idea that the land of Palestine is the land of Israel, and that the Palestinians have less rights than the Israelis, and that the Israelis have a right to impose a nation state, a Jewish nation state all over Palestine, and make sure that the Palestinians do not have a role in deciding their fate in that state that the Zionist movement built. I think that is very, 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 very important. I always say the difference, if someone criticizes a religion, it criticizes people for who they are, which is racism. If someone criticizes an ideological act, they criticize the person for what he did, not for who he is, for what he does. And that's allowed, and that is important, because it doesn't matter what is your gender or religion. If you are kicking me out of my home, if you're not allowing me to return, if you cage me in a ghetto, if you're killing my family members, you're destroying, demolishing my houses, you allow settlers to burn my fields, if you're doing all that, then I'm against your ideology. I don't even care what is your religion. I care what you do in the name of the ideology that you are saying is inspired by your religion. But we know, like the Islamic State, I'm a Jew. I don't think that doing all these things to the Palestinian is Jewish in my mind. I think it's anti-Jewish. It's totally anti-Jewish to my mind to, to expel people, to demolish their houses, to ghettoize them, to colonize them. For me, this is not Judaism. I don't think this is the message of Judaism to the world. I'm much more aligned to people who understand Judaism as something that forces them to be at the spearhead of movements against the abolition of slavery, for the rights of African Americans, against imperialism. I mean, that's for me is the Jewish legacy, not creating Judaism as a powerful racist nationalism that directs all its force and power against the Palestinian people.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let's go back to the Palestinians, and you've used the word genocide many, many times in your lectures, in your interviews and conversations, etc. Israel demanded, or at least dropped a piece of paper instructing the Palestinians to move from the north to the south, that they were going to be bombing in the north, and they did, or they were going to be starting ground attacks. And then the Palestinians moved to the south, and they still continue to bomb them. In addition to that, we've seen arrests, we've seen over 200 killed at the West Bank. I remember seeing a conversation with you, and I think it was on Democracy Now!, where the word Nakba was used. And you said, they said, is this a second Nakba? And you said, no, the Nakba never stopped. And you also said, this is, a slow genocide. Talk to us about that, please, sir.
Yes, I actually used the term incremental genocide.
Incremental genocide, thank you.
And for me, I admit, I'm not an international jurist, so I don't claim to understand international law better than any other person compared to the experts of international law. But I'm a political sociologist and scientist, and I read very carefully the definitions of genocide. And it's very clear that if people are targeted because of who they are, not because of what they did, because of who they are, and they are targeted in a way that can either directly lead to the death, namely they are killed, or indirectly can lead to the death. Let's say they're not getting enough food. Let's say that they don't have the facilities in a hospital to treat them, and therefore they die in the hospital. or they are being traumatized to such a level that actually they are, walking dead people. If I look at the Israeli policies, in particular since 1967 in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip in particular since 2006, where Israel determined what kind of food goes in, who can go in, who can go out. So first of all, even before the 7th of October, and the United Nations said it in a very important 2020 report, people in Gaza were doomed to starve. And an incremental genocide means that you can still stop it. It's not, we're not talking about after it happened. We're talking while it's happening, and hopefully you can stop it. The similar thing is happening now in Gaza. What really matters is not this Israeli narrative. We told people to go to the north, and if to the south, I'm sorry, and if they are in the south, they are safe. One fact is not changing since the 7th of October. Every 10 minutes, a Palestinian child is being killed by the Israeli army. So what is it? Children are not fighters. Children are not part of the army of your enemy. If you are so careful with human with civilian casualties, how do you explain that statistics? The only explanation is you don't care. You don't really care. It's one thing to have a propaganda that says you care, but what matters to us is what is really happening. Now, I think that the numbers, when you talk about numbers like 11,000 and 12,000, maybe that's very important for listeners in Nigeria to understand. I say to you as an historian, never look only at the absolute number.
Right.
Look at the relative number. Think about a nation that would have 50 million. How many would be 11,000 if the nation, be 50 million?
Yeah.
That would kind of amount to 1.5 million people dead. And this is really, if you look at it in relative terms, you understand that this is massive killing of people. And there is no other, entry in our vocabulary to describe what human beings are doing to other human beings than the word, genocide. And I still think that there is still time to stop it from becoming worse. All you need is a vote which didn't happen in the British Parliament, a vote in the American Congress that didn't happen. These two countries, which carry a lot of responsibility for what happened in Palestine over the years, the fact that the majority of the parliamentarians in Britain and in the United States voted against a ceasefire. They voted against the idea that this massive killing would stop, is beyond my comprehension. I don't know how they sleep at night.
Indeed.
After taking such a decision. And their decision is important because it's not symbolic. If they made that decision, there would have been a ceasefire. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's different. Yeah. If the parliament in Nigeria votes for a ceasefire or not, it will not affect, unfortunately, the reality on the ground. But if the British Parliament and the American Congress vote on ceasefire, then there will be a ceasefire.
Yes, indeed. Especially given that Balfour was British himself and they caused half of the problem. So
absolutely.
I have a question from one of my listeners, and I know some of you are trying to call. I don't have Prof for long, so please just send your messages to our WhatsApp number. Says, good evening.
I hope to be able to come again.
I
know
so
I only gave you 45 minutes today, but I'm very happy to come again when I'm less squeezed for time. I'm sure we can do that as well.
Thank you so much. We'll be holding you to that. 2 hours next time. I have a question here. Good evening, Cecilia. Please ask your guest this question. Where was Israel occupied as a nation during the Roman Empire, or does it mean Israel wasn't anywhere before 1948? We need to answer this. That's from Taiwo Inijibo. Let me add on to that what I call the Jesus question. Right? In Nigeria, where it's a very, as you probably know, incredibly religious country. okay?
Yeah.
Immediately, certain pastors had already started to align with Israel because they had begun to tell their worshippers that Israel were the Israelites and they were the people of Jesus, etc., etc. I had Miko Peled here. Miko Peled broke that myth, but many still didn't believe him. And I know,
Still believe it.
yes, and I know you wrote the book, The 10 Myths of Israel. Oh, Prof, I don't know
That's
how
right.
long you've got. I need you to answer that because I do have two more questions. The Jesus
Yes, I will
question,
answer it.
the Roman
Yes.
question, where was Israel? Why are they not the Israelites from the Bible? Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you. First of all, the whole idea that you can come to someone's homeland and claim that you used to live there 2,000 years ago, and therefore that homeland belongs to you, is beyond absurd. I mean, imagine if someone would come to your house in Lagos and knock at the middle of the night on your door and would say, "Excuse me, dear madam, I used to live here, or my family used to live here 2,000 years ago." And you would say, "What does this nutcase want from me?" And you will ask me politely to leave. And then I would come back with the police. And the police would say, he provided us with a book that says that 2,000 years, your house in Lagos belongs to him. And therefore, you have to give him at least half of the house. I mean, this is exactly the seriousness of that argument. It's beyond comprehension, really. We know little of what happened in history anyway, as real academics, as real scientists. We don't know. It's very difficult to reconstruct what happened in Nigeria 2,000 years ago, and very difficult to reconstruct what happened in Palestine 2,000 years ago. Academics who are archaeologists tell you that different kind of people, among them the Israelites, for different short periods, ruled what can be called the land of Palestine. The Israelite rule was one of the shortest, by the way, in the last 4,000 years. It was definitely was not the only one, and it was not the longest one. So many other people can claim the same claim. The Hittites, the Canaanites, I don't want to give all the names. Some of them, by the way, are in the Old Testament. You can see all these names. And therefore, this idea that this is at all relevant to what goes on today is ridiculous. Israel as a nation state is a modern invention. I explained why. I fully understand why Jews in Europe wanted a safe nation state. I said it's tragic that the place they chose was where someone else has lived. And not only that, they thought they had the right by force to expel those people. That's a tragedy. I don't care if someone tells me that where I live was once a family house of his or hers 2,000 years ago. If they just want to come and visit, even if they want to have a memorial, But if they tell me you have to leave your house because of that, I will kick their ass. I will not accept it. And I think that's the kind of fabrication and mythology that doesn't help us to deal with the human suffering on both sides. Without resorting to this mythical nonsense that doesn't help anyone. Everybody can bring a God that would tell us that Palestine belongs to him. But these gods will not fight each other. We will fight each other because of that. And that's not a solution.
Yeah.
That's a mutual assured destruction.
Yeah. You were in the Israeli military, right? You also fought during the Arab-Israeli war, the Arab-Israel war. There's and please correct me if I'm wrong, but, I've read quite a bit on all of this, and especially testimonies. There's a trend. When I read testimonies from pro-Palestine Israelis, there's a trend that emerges. It's almost like they unburden or they purge themselves. Something happens that forces them to go on a journey of truth, to purge themselves of what some have described as indoctrination. Is that correct?
It's a very good description, because I know from my own case and cases from friends of mine who underwent a similar trajectory, that this is a journey. Namely, there's no epiphany. There's no moment where suddenly you say, I was wrong, and you totally change your point of view. Because you come from a very indoctrinated society that is very sure of itself, of its moral justice, and so on. So it's a journey, and journeys can differ, but they have some similar things. One, I think it's important that I was born in a city of Haifa, which relatively to other cities in Israel and Palestine has a relatively mixed society of Arabs and Jews. So for me, Palestinians, if you want, were human beings from very early on, and that's very important. Secondly, I decided to do my studies outside of Israel, and it helps to get out of your indoctrination. I also decided to work with an Arab supervisor for my doctorate, and that also humanizes for you the Arab world, the Arab ideas, and above it all, the fact that I chose as an historian to look at the very important year of 48, at the Nakba of 48, revealed to me the evidence that showed me that what my Palestinian friends were telling me was far more closer to the truth than what I learned in school, heard at home, and heard from my professors in the university. So I definitely needed the journey. I needed to convince myself, but there's a moment where you cross the river. You cross the river, and you know there's no going back. And what I'll tell you when exactly you know that moment has arrived. When you say to yourself, I'm at peace with myself. I'm at peace with myself. I know that I have examined it from all possible angles, and I know I'm not a traitor, I'm not a liar, and I'm very loyal to my moral compass, and that's why I'm with the Palestinians, not because I'm a Palestinian, and not because I'm an Israeli, because that's how I understand humanity and what humanity demands of you as a person.
Why the need for indoctrination, though? Why do Israel? I remember watching teenagers who talked about, and this was even American teenagers, and it would appear that a lot of Zionists or Zionist supporters or supporters of the Zionist ideology in Israel are even American returnees, as we will call them in Nigeria, Jewish American returnees. Yep. Why the need? Why does Israel, if it's so confident in itself as the chosen people, as belonging to a land, why the need for the indoctrination or for the Zionist indoctrination?
That's an excellent question. And the answer to it is also the answer to the question, why such a powerful state still needs a lobby in the world to convince people that it has the right to exist. Nigeria doesn't have to go around the world and say we have the right to exist. Most countries in the world don't need a lobby to justify their existence. Israel does. Israel still does.
Yeah.
The reason is exactly this gap, this contradiction between who you claim you are and what you are doing. Without that indoctrination, there is a danger that young Israelis would think like I do. That's the danger. The danger is that I would say, wait a minute, yes, my family was, most of my members of my family were killed in the Holocaust, but that does not justify kicking out the Palestinians from my hometown in Haifa. Yes, the Jews need a safe place, but that doesn't justify killing teenagers in the West Bank. Now, the indoctrination ensures that these questions would not be asked, that the Palestinians, even if they are children, would be, framed as enemies who want to destroy you. In many ways, the continuation of those who wanted to destroy you in Europe. And that's why you need to sustain that indoctrination, because the reality on the ground keeps coming back to you and poses real questions of your claims. I just heard a conversation today in the street. I'm now in Haifa on the way to England. I couldn't believe my ears, but that explains how it works. When someone said to another person, I'm so I really was moved by the picture of all these babies who were taken out of the incubators because
Wow.
there's no electricity in Shifa hospital in Gaza. And you
People
can see
don't know
them
where
lying.
Haifa is. Please, sir, just tell us exactly where Haifa is.
Oh, Haifa is in the north of Israel,
Thank you.
30 kilometers from the border of Lebanon. Beautiful town. I hope you all can come and visit.
I will
And
be
still
seeing
the
you
only
soon.
and the only place where Arab and Jews really have a good relationship compared to many other parts. But she said, one of the women there said, I don't care about these babies because they will all grow to be Hamas terrorists. That's what indoctrination does to you. It dehumanizes another human being. But if you don't dehumanize it, you start to question the kind of question that I put.
Yeah, indeed. I know you've got to go. I'm
I do,
so looking at
I'm
the
so
time.
sorry. There's another interview.
Finally, what does peace, the framework of peace, because you've been very good at pushing, the framework of genocide and Israel's behavior and history and the rights of the Palestinians. What is the framework of peace like for you right now? I know we don't know when this is going to end, but how do you frame it? How would you frame it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm part of a movement of Palestinians and Israelis called the One Democratic State campaign. We really believe that the only way forward is to make everyone an equal citizen between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, not a two-state solution. One state, one democratic state, where everybody enjoys their rights, regardless of their gender, religion, ethnicity, and so on. A state that would allow the Palestinian refugees to return, a state that would abolish any institution that discriminate on the basis of religion or nationality. We believe that a lot of Palestinians that is their dream, to have normal life in a normal state. We know it will be difficult for Israeli Jews to give up their privileges. It was difficult for the whites in South Africa.
Indeed.
To give up their privileges, and therefore we need strong pressure from the outside. But these are, and with this I will end, these are the only two options. Either you have this win-win, as Angela Davis likes to say, this is the win-win situation. Everybody enjoys it. Or you go to the mutual assured destruction. Nobody is going to win if the conflict continues. Even if Israel has the strongest army in the world, it will still suffer setbacks as it did on the 7th of October in the future. And this will never end unless what most normal people crave for would be granted to whoever lives now in historical Palestine and whoever was expelled from that.
Professor Ilan Pappe, in fact, before I let you go, if I don't tell you that my friend Dr. Mukhtar Imam just messaged me to say, tell him I'm his #1 fan in Nigeria. He'll probably never talk to me again. So, Professor Ilan Pappe, historian, political scientist, activist, peace activist, thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your
I will
program.
be in touch. My boss will be in touch. We need you.
I'm sure you
give
will
us
be.
A lecture.
Excellent. I'm looking forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Have
you
a wonderful
so much.
evening. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.